I couldn't sleep, so I had another memory come back. This one is actually rather hilarious and kind of stupid. So, Stu, I didn't really understand this for the longest time, but I think this memory puts it in perspective. Because Stu gets his power from eating these women's brains called the Memphis, and then he gets you with LSD and he hypnotizes you. He's not allowed to use that direct hypnosis to murder you. At least I don't think. I think that's some kind of deal they made with the Memphis, that they're not allowed to use the powers to directly murder anybody. It has to all be indirect murder. Passive aggressive shit, you know. The thing, passive aggressive behavior is actually considered a mental condition, by the way. So, I have a memory, and like I said, this is going to be kind of funny, of Stu. Yeah, I was asleep in my bed. I suddenly felt a tingling on my tongue. My eyes popped open, and suddenly I was under hypnosis. This is because, once again, I learned this when I was president. They like getting you when you're asleep because you're most vulnerable. They put LSD in your mouth, and then you're immediately their zombie. Once they give you this LSD, you're a zombie. Okay? You're removed from yourself, and that makes you easy to control. So Stu led me out of my house, either while everybody was sleeping, or everybody was just under the threat of death and everybody ignored him. I don't know which one. I personally just don't give a fuck anymore. I really don't. So, he leads me out toward my stepdad's barn, and then to my clubhouse. Behind my clubhouse, as he's leading me, he steps on a rake. It's not a rake, and that's important. It's a hoe. Okay. So, Stu steps on a hoe, like a garden hoe. It flies up, hits him in the face, and I snap out of the hypnosis. And I'm suddenly standing outside like, what the fuck am I doing out here? I must be sleepwalking again. Because I used to sleepwalk when I was a kid, so it's not weird for me to wake up from a sleepwalk when I used to sleepwalk as a kid. Okay. So, Stu gets hit in the face with the hoe. I wake up, he freaks out, and he's like, no! and then he immediately gets me with the LSD and tetralead spray. Puts me back under. But subconscious suggestive state Bob. Stu's like, I'm taking you into the woods, and I'm gonna kill you! This is it! Oh, and all of his crazy neurotic weirdness. Suggestive state Bob says to him, so when you go to your church to record this in your journal or diary or tell the story, you're going to tell the story of you abduct me out of my bed, took me out of my house, walked me all the way out here, stepped on a hoe, smacked yourself in the face, and then you executed me in the woods behind my house. And I smiled and started laughing. And then Stu was like, stop laughing. It's not funny. Nobody's going to know about the hoe. And I was like, you're not acting with integrity, sir. And then he was like, I am acting. Oh. And then he was like, you know what, Bobby? Guess what? What I say is true. So you're going to forget that I stepped on the rake and it hit me in the face. And suggestive state Bob looked down, saw it was a hoe, looked back at Stu, looked back down at the hoe, looked back at Stu, and said, okay. And suggestive state Bob forgot Stu stepped on a rake, which didn't actually happen. Ever. So, didn't happen ever yet. because this gets stupider. Stu leads me around my clubhouse that's covered in roofing shingles, back around the two trees, and then around the path again, where my stepdad has left a rake. One of those heavy metal rakes, not like the normal ones you use to rake leaves. And Stu gets around the hoe. He deliberately, knowingly sees the hoe, steps away from the hoe, and then steps on the rake. He smacks himself in the head with the rake. Sideways, like he steps on it, the rake's like here, it flies up. It's like that cartoon style. And he snaps me out of the suggestive state again. I'm out of it for like 5 seconds. He immediately gets me with the tetralet. There's like no skip to this. You're gonna forget that. I didn't step on the rake. And I was like, yeah, you didn't step on the rake. You stepped on the hoe. And he, hoe? I was, yeah, you stepped on a hoe, not a rake. And then he was, no, I didn't step on anything. I didn't step on the rake. I didn't step on the hoe. And then he was like, that's a hoe. And he pointed at the rake. And I said, that's a rake, not a hoe. Now, Stu didn't seem to fully comprehend what was going on here. Now, there's two things to this. One, either I had night vision, because remember I had been sleeping, which means my pupils were dilated, and I could easily see the hoe and the rake and make the distinctions between the two. Or two, Stu doesn't know the difference between a hoe and a rake. Those are your two options. But either option, it doesn't matter, because this entire situation is funny as shit. Because Stu does it again. He walks me around. He walks me around the clubhouse a third time. Once we get around, he goes, you're gonna forget I stepped on the rake. And I was like, okay. And then he stopped, and he looked down at the hoe, and then he looked back at me. And then he looked back at the hoe. And then he said, that's a rake. And I said, okay. And I told him, we get down. He navigates past the rake and the hoe this time. He stops. This is the stupid part. This is where it gets really stupid. He stops and then tells me, because I'm in the suggestive state, to step on the hoe. Well, he tells me to step on the rake. To which I look over and I reply, that's a hoe. And then he goes, no, step on the rake. So I walk over and I step on not the spikes of the rake, where it's like bent at a right angle so it'll lift up. I step on the pole of the rake instead of on the part that would make it smack me in the face. Stu gets pissed, and he leads me over to the hoe again and tells me to step on the rake. So I walk back and I step on the pole of the rake a second time, because I'm in the suggestive state and I'm an idiot. Stu gets pissed, starts yelling at me, and then I literally just respond back, I can't wait till you're writing this part in your journal where you're leading me in circles around this house. You're going to execute me in the woods. But leading up to that, you stepped on the hoe and got hit in the face. And then you told me to step on the rake. And I was like, and then we're going to go in circles again. And then he said, no, we're not going in circles again. And I was like, we've been going in circles this entire time. To which he said, how many times do you think we walked around that house? How many times do you think we walked around the building? It wasn't, to Stu, it wasn't a clubhouse. It was a building on my property or whatever. He called it something, I want to say, because I called it a shed. He called it like a utility building or something arbitrary and weird. I don't know what. My own brain didn't understand what he was calling it. So Stu goes, how many times do you think we walked around in circles? And I looked at the building and I looked back at him and I said, I don't know, I'm dizzy from going in circles. He was like, what? I said, I must be dizzy from going in circles. What my subconscious mind was trying to say is we were doing the same thing over and over again for no fucking reason. And Stu was an imbecile. That's what it was trying to say, but failing to communicate that because it doesn't know. I guess it just doesn't know. So Stu goes, you're going to forget that I led you around the building. You're going to forget. And he uses the hypnotic language, like the suggestive shit. And then you're going to follow me into the woods. And I'm going to shoot you in the head. And I said, no. He was like, I'm going to be clear on this suggestion. You're going to forget I stepped on the rake. And and we had a back and forth, which ultimately led to Stu deciding, because I told him he could come back tomorrow and try again. And this time we wouldn't have to worry about him stepping on the hoe or stepping on the rake. Yeah. My stepdad had this thing where he would leave his tools out and then tell me to go and pick up the tools, and I never did. I would just leave them out in the yard. To give you an idea, Stu stepping on the rake didn't just happen like that one time he was leading me in hypnosis. It happened a second time with the hoe where he hit himself in the face. But this gets even stupider because when I hung out with my idiot friend Jash, the guy I call Taco, Taco comes over and he basically starts telling me he wants to see me step on a shovel so the shovel will flip up and hit me in the face. So I told him it doesn't happen with a shovel. That happens with a hoe or a rake. Because I remembered I saw this guy do it once, and I paused and I stared at Taco, and he was like, what? And I was like, I don't know. I just remember a guy stepping on a hoe and it hitting him, and then him telling me it's not a hoe, it's a rake. Taco. We had a fight. We got into an argument because he wanted to see me step on the rake and have it hit me in the face. So then he didn't think it would actually work, so then he actually did it. He stomped on the rake and it flew up and hit him in his big ass nose, because Taco has a big ass nose. My cuddle buddy came over and we had a bonfire, and she did the same thing where she tried to talk me to stepping on a rake, on the hoe, which she kept calling a rake. Which is what happens with these idiots, because the church leader decides what something is, even if it's not that thing. So if Stu tells them that the hoe is a rake, they have to say the hoe is a rake. Now this gets stupid, because Stu then told Witchy Poo that I had some kind of an immunity to hypnosis, because he doesn't know the difference between a hoe and a rake. You get where this is going? He thought that my brain was wired differently. And when you tell people to forget things with hypnosis, they're not supposed to ever be able to remember them. Kind of like how I'm remembering these moments. I'm only remembering these moments because in my brain, the things Stu told me to forget about were inconsistent, or weirdly my subconscious, for whatever reason, when Stu told me to forget an event, it immediately rewrote the event so I could remember it through a different channel. Stu erased the names of the people who murdered the Black Lives Matter people, but my mind remembered Anthony from Ant-Man and Denny's, the restaurant, because those people are involved. Somebody named Anthony and some guy named Dennis is involved in the murders of the Black Lives Matter people. That is what my mind decided to do to have as a workaround to how Stu did his fucking shit. But that's not the only weird thing. I remembered a couple minutes ago. I couldn't stop giggling though when the dude, because it's just some vaudeville cartoon shit. It really is. And I remember telling Stu the way I got out of him murdering me was, do you really want to write in your journal you stepped on a hoe and then a rake multiple times, and then you shot me in the head? And I was like, and you're just going to lie to people about it? Seriously? Yeah. When I last talked to Anal Eating Mummy God, one of the time, honestly, I'm not even sure when the last time I fucking talked to that guy, to be honest. He basically said Danielle McGinnis had fucked everything up. Stu had fucked everything up. And he said to make things worse, the worst thing on the planet had happened. Yes, sir. The worst thing in the world had happened. I was right. Everybody was going to interfere and try to fuck with me and stop me in their own little special passive-aggressive way, and nobody was going to follow his instructions. He said Danielle McGinnis had gone about the entire situation all wrong, which he didn't expect. Stu had gone about the situation in all the wrong directions, and Stu was constantly interfering. The blue-eyed guy tried to warn everybody, but then failed because he can't warn shit because he can't do anything Stu doesn't want him to do, so he was like just being awkward and weird and stupid. He did the same thing with the belly girl, where he was just being stupid for whatever fucking reason. I guess not completely abandoning his morals, but not quite acting on them. To which Anal Eating Mummy God said, we're not going to guilt you into action. We're not going to individuate you into action. And he said, Bobby, I want you to think really hard at this. What makes you take action? What makes you take action? And I told him, what? And he said, what makes you take action? And I told him, I'll just wait for the universe. He said, don't wait for the universe. What makes you take action? And he told me, he's like, I want you to clear your mind, and whatever the first thing is that comes to your mind, you tell me what it is. Well, I had this flashback when I was going to this tea place, and they had a Evil Dead 2 poster on the wall. I told Anal Eating Mummy God because I was standing in the back of Papa John's when I was talking to him on my cell phone. Not on my cell phone, the blue-eyed guy's cell phone. I told him in Evil Dead, there's a scene with Bruce Campbell, Ash Williams, in the cabin, where he's laughing and giggling with all the monsters, and the spirits are torturing him, and he's just gone completely bonkers. And then my brother's like, oh, I love Evil Dead because Ash Williams suddenly mans up and just handles things. He turns into a man at random, without reason. He murders his girlfriend, he does all these things in the cabin. And then Anal Eating Mummy God's like, basically, I'm gonna go watch Evil Dead. And then he contacts me later at night. It's really dark. I don't know if I'm on my phone or somebody else's phone. It's just really dark in my room. And he's like, mind you, they keep you high on LSD for this shit. So he goes, Bobby, nothing about Evil Dead makes any sense at all. Humans don't do what Ash Williams does in that movie. He says, if you're implying that suddenly everything just changes and it just goes in a different direction, he's like, I got news for you, that never happens. Doesn't happen in life, doesn't happen in psychology. He was like, that is a movie, that is a work of fiction. So I replied back to him, well, anger runs out. It eventually burns out. I learned that. And I was like, so fear has to burn out. And then he goes, fear never burns out. Fear never burns out. He said you can be completely emotionless and still have fear. You can be lobotomized and still have fear. And we had a back and forth, and we never actually reached whatever my subconscious was trying to say about Evil Dead. Yeah. Me too. Me too. Maybe it was just a rant from an LSD brain that just remembered a movie.